Why was dueling such a thing in early America?
This is the question. Why was dueling such a thing? Because it makes no sense if you think about it, right? So I insult you, and your response is to invite me to a field so we can shoot at each other. And this does not resolve the insult. But the idea was, and not every insult deserved a duel. There were some, if I call you a liar or a coward, then I know that probably bad things will happen. But the idea of dueling wasn't so much, and this will be counterintuitive, wasn't so much the shooting as being willing to stand up and be shot at to defend your reputation. So personal reputation, particularly for a gentleman in this time period, and really particularly for a political person in this time period, reputation was everything. Reputation was a possession. And in a period when you don't really have political parties for a while, early America, you're voted in or seen as a leader because of your reputation. So it matters a lot. And so if you're insulted, many men felt compelled to invite the person who insulted them, to a dueling ground. And they would go through, in some ways, it's kind of like the movies. They don't go back to back and then spin. There's one duel I found out where there was the whole spinning thing, and the balls from the guns went all over the place. Didn't work well, but kind of like the movies, you shoot at each other. But the point, as I suggested a moment ago, is to stand there and be willing to die for your honor. And because of that, the vast majority of duels, people don't get killed. The point of a duel is actually not to kill the person you're shooting at, which I realize doesn't entirely make sense.
Right.
But it's about showing yourself to be a leader.
So then what was it between Burr and Hamilton? Like what precipitated their duel?
The question. Okay, so they had been colleagues and friends of a sort for a while. They moved in the same circle, and they sometimes practiced defended clients together as lawyers. But Hamilton saw Burr as a real political opportunist, and along those lines, Burr ousted Hamilton's father-in-law from Congress, ran for Congress and ousted Hamilton's father-in-law. As time went on, and it became clear to Hamilton, at least, that Burr didn't really seem to have guiding principles. He seemed to be, sort of spur of the moment kind of guy, which is really helpful in politics, but not particularly trustworthy if you're in an era where everybody has some kind of guiding ideology.
Yeah.
Hamilton came to really distrust him. And so generally speaking, you could count on him to come forward in one way or another to try and get people to not support Burr. Now, this became a big deal in the election of 1800, when we didn't have, like the modern day, we don't have separate, like a ticket that has vice president and president on it. You just voted for all the candidates, and whoever gets the most votes wins, and whoever gets the second most votes is vice president. In 1796, that resulted in a Republican, Jeffersonian Republican president and a Federalist vice president. In 1800, the two candidates for the Democratic Republicans tied. And although Aaron Burr was clearly intended to be the vice presidential candidate, his attitude was basically, well, I'm not going to campaign, but if I get elected, I'll take the presidency. And he almost saw it like an insult, right? How dare you say that I am not worthy of the presidency if I should get enough votes? For obvious reasons, this did not thrill Thomas Jefferson, who becomes president. So Burr is the vice president for Jefferson's first term. He's ousted after that. So now, and I should say, Hamilton did not turn that election. I know the Hamilton musical suggests it was all Hamilton. He tried. He tried really hard. It's not a lot of evidence that people really listened to him, because by that point, he was trouble himself. But at any rate, Burr goes back to New York, because now he's like, okay, I think the national stage is not working so well for me. Go back to New York and I'll run for office there. So he runs for governor. And guess who appears out of the shadows to prevent him from becoming governor? Alexander Hamilton, who once again, there he is saying, no, don't vote for this guy. And in this case, Hamilton was speaking, as he did, so freely and easily about negative things about Aaron Burr that some of it made a newspaper. And one of Burr's supporters handed that newspaper, that clipping, to Burr. And there's actually a pamphlet by one of Burr's supporters. And his logic for handing this over was, he said, I follow Burr. He's a leader. I'm behind him. But if the guy can't win any office, why are we following him? So the idea was he's going to have to do something to prove himself. And if he doesn't, he might not really be a political leader after this point. So now Burr's lost that election. He's off the national stage, and he has in his hand a newspaper in which Hamilton is insulting him. So that ends up leading to the duel.
I don't want to get bogged down in this, but is this why we have the 12th Amendment? Is this because of what happened with Burr? And
ultimately, yes.
It precipitates that.
Ultimately, yes. So after the 1800 election, they realized that the whole presidential election thing was a little scary. I mean, the response of national politicians was, wow, we didn't really rethink that one, because the whole nation divided between political ideology and then between two people, and that was really bad. Maybe we shouldn't do that again. And they were trying to come up with other ways to elect presidents. So yeah, ultimately that's where you get the amendment from.
Okay, so now the two, Burr and Hamilton, decide to meet on the Field of Honor.
Yes, indeed.
Which is in Weehawken, New Jersey. And what happens? What happens? Take us there.
Ooh, on the spot. You are there. So it's unclear, even now, whether Hamilton did or didn't shoot at Aaron Burr. They were positioned facing each other. Their seconds loaded their dueling pistols. The command was given 1, 2, 3, present. And in the end, Burr was not struck. Hamilton was hit in the abdomen. I think it went through his liver and lodged in his spine, and he dropped. Now, before the duel, and the Hamilton musical makes it more interesting and more complicated to talk about this, because everybody knows some basic facts. Right. His son had fought a duel 3 years earlier, Philip, and Hamilton had told his son a good Christian doesn't shoot at another man in this way. And so based on that, and based on the fact that Hamilton told his friends he was not going to shoot at Burr, he actually said, I am not going to shoot at him the first time, but if Burr says honor isn't satisfied, if there's a second round of shots, then everything's off the table. But at any rate, he was telling people he wasn't going to shoot at Burr. And some of Hamilton's friends left town because they thought, this is just going to be bad. Like, whatever happens, and it's probably not going to be good for Hamilton. So they decide to displace themselves. And indeed, Hamilton is fatally wounded. He dies the next day. Again, as I said, it's not clear whether he actually did or didn't shoot the gun. Supposedly, when he was being rowed back across the river to Manhattan from Weehawken, New Jersey, he glanced at the gun and said, be careful of that, it might go off. If that happened, that suggests something, but in the end, the 2 seconds wrote up accounts of the duel, which is normally what happened after a duel, and they didn't agree on what happened. And at some point in my research at the New York Historical Society, I found, Burr's second was tried for his participation in the duel, and he took notes of his own trial. And the doctor, David Hosack, who was there tending to them, testified at the trial. This is a document I found at New York Historical that had eyewitness accounts of the Burr-Hamilton duel, which, as far as I know, had not been found before, because the date was 1805 and not 1804. At any rate, for people who know the Hamilton lyrics, in the 10 Duel Commandments, when the lyric says they turn their back, the doctor turns his back so he can have deniability, That comes from the document I found.
Right.
And that's the only place where that's revealed in that way. Hosak says he heard a shot, a pause, and a shot, which, first of all, means there were 2 shots, but then complicates it further as to what really happened. So at any rate, the important point is Hamilton dies.
Hamilton dies. What does Burr do when he finds out that Hamilton has died?
So this is a big deal. First of all, I missed an important point, which is Aaron Burr was vice president at the time, right? So the vice president just killed.
He was a sitting vice president who knew he wasn't going to stand again for vice president. He knew his days as the Veep were numbered.
Probably. And so it's a big deal. You know, it would have been a big deal if there had been any duel between important people, with the vice president as one of them. Bigger deal with one of them seemingly fatally wounded. They were putting up like bulletins in Lower Manhattan announcing how Hamilton was doing. Burr's friends said, essentially, you got to leave town. Burr left town. His second left town. The boatman who rowed them across left town. Like anyone associated with Burr, like, we're out of here.
Because it's illegal to duel.
Well, it's illegal to duel. It's illegal to send a challenge. It's illegal in different ways in different states. But pretty much everywhere it was illegal to send a challenge. And Hamilton died. So now there's murder potentially at hand. So in one way or another, Burr and his friends leave town. Burr goes to South Carolina, and they're happier with dueling.
Of course he does.
Yes. Well, and why is it always? Why always? Anyway, he goes south, and he stays with a friend. In the South, they're pretty much okay with dueling, and they're not so okay with Hamilton, so that was probably a smart maneuver. And he hides there for a while, and then he comes back to Washington and takes back his seat presiding over the Senate as vice president, which is pretty remarkable. And people who are there acknowledge that he looked a little strained. His facial expression, he looked a little strained. But supposedly, Jeffersonian Republicans came up and shook his hand to show that he was A-OK, particularly because he'd killed off this important Federalist, right? So obviously Federalists were outraged, and others noticed and weren't outraged.
How did the Southern press handle it? Like, because I remember reading accounts of Charles Sumner's caning, you know, in the Senate at the hands of a South Carolinian congressman. And this is at this point they have like Telegraph and it's kind of immediate. And the Boston newspapers are talking about the tragedy that has happened. And then like the Richmond Enquirer's like, you should hit him again. Like, good job. Like, what was it like in the South in the aftermath of this?
Well, it was complicated because unlike 1856 and the caning of Sumner and slavery being the issue, and Sumner being this guy who was constantly attacking slavery and the South, in this case, a lot of people, or a reasonable amount of people, dueled. So some of Burr's friends, when people are trying to figure out ways to find him guilty under the law, some of them argued. There was actually a group of members of Congress who put together a petition that basically said, we never bring people to trial for dueling. So many of us have dueled. Why are you punishing Aaron Burr? So it's a different thing.
Everybody does it.
Everybody, well, a lot of somebodies do it. And so some in the South were not distressed. Some in the South understood that dueling probably is something that should be quashed. So anti-dueling sentiment rose in a number of places, even a little bit in the South. So the big dealness of the duel had kind of a mixed impact. But for sure, the North had the sort of outraged response, and the Federalist North, because the Federalists are pretty much a Northern party, quote unquote, at that point, they had a lot to say.
Ultimately, Burr is charged with something, right?
Well, so he's charged with sending a challenge, I believe. I don't think he's charged for murder. He's charged in both New Jersey and New York, because the duel is fought in New Jersey, but the challenge was sent in New York. There's a reason when you're researching dueling, you almost never see the challenge letter. Almost never, because they destroy them. Because that's the crime. One time I saw a challenge letter and I went rushing up to the librarian, and they probably didn't know I was like, it's a challenge letter. Look, no one would understand but me why that mattered, but at any rate. So he gets charged. He is not found guilty of whatever, and he flees.
He's not found guilty.
He is not found guilty.
And there was no immunity. Like, he's the sitting vice president. There's no immunity.
Burr did not have immunity because he was vice president. Shocking, right? No immunity.
So was anyone convicted for anything involving the death of Alexander Hamilton?
I don't believe so. Shockingly, which tells you something about dueling as being a hated practice by many, but still an acceptable practice. And it's the lawmakers breaking the law by dueling. The place where I found the document about the doctor turning his back so he can have deniability, that was the trial of Aaron Burr second. So he gets brought to trial too. But I don't think people are convicted of anything. What I don't know, and I would have to check, sometimes you lost the franchise, right? You lost your right to vote, or they found some way to punish you in that way. But in this case of this duel, I don't think anybody really suffers serious fate.
But Burr loses his reputation.
Well, Burr is basically in trouble now because he's immediately depicted as an evil murderer who savagely killed Alexander Hamilton, and people make up stories about him that he wore a silk jacket which is bulletproof, and people actually believe that. But anyway, that was one of the rumors, that he was practicing for days so he'd be sure to kill Hamilton. Evidence suggests that Burr didn't intend to kill Hamilton, which, certainly Burr's enemies were not going to allow to exist. So what he sees is all of his enemies, both from Jeffersonian Republicans and the Federalists, ganging up to just crush him in some way. So he is like the ultimate evil enemy, despite the fact that dueling is acceptable. And Hamilton doesn't help matters by leaving behind a last statement in which he explains why he felt the need to duel with Aaron Burr.
Did he write this before the duel or in the period between getting shot and dying, which was like 36 hours?
Oh, good question. No, before the duel. He put together a collection of things. If I die, here you go.
Because he thought of everything. Like that was Hamilton, right? He thought of everything.
That is totally Hamilton. But Burr did a similar thing. No one ever gives him credit for that. But if you're going to fight a duel, you're probably not going to die, but you might. That's the whole point of it. So, and in his this final statement, he explains why he felt the need to oppose Burr. He explains that after an entire career of opposing Burr, he can't now say, I'm sorry, which would be ridiculous. And then he says something along the lines of, this is going to be a bad paraphrase, in those future crises of our nation, which seem likely to happen, I felt the need to be available to be called upon. What he's saying is, if I don't fight the duel, I'll be dishonored, and I won't be able to come to the aid of my country in the future crises that seem likely to happen. And Hamilton believed on a certain level that the Constitution was ultimately going to fall.
Right.
So he thinks there's going to be a crisis, and he can't be the guy coming forward to help, in his mind, if he doesn't fight the duel.
And the Constitution would have many crises as time goes on. So Burr finishes his term as VP. He beats the murder rap. Yes. What does he do next?
So what does he do after the duel? Now he has a problem. The national stage is off limits to him. He tried to run for governor, and Hamilton prevented that. So state politics don't seem like they're good. So now he decides the West. National stage, not so good. State politics, not so good. But the West. I could do something in the West. I could earn glory in the West. I could it's not entirely clear ultimately what he thinks he's doing in the West, but he very clearly heads west, organizes some kind of expedition with young men who were impressed with him, sort of trailing after him. He talked with the British minister. He suggests maybe he can break off part of the West. And
Are we talking about Texas? Or are we talking about, or what would become the state of Texas?
what would become the state of Texas, parts of Louisiana, part of the Louisiana Purchase, which is, new.
So I remember reading about another famous American duelist, and he crosses paths with Aaron Burr as a young man.
Yes,
Andrew Jackson,
indeed.
who was no stranger to a duel.
No,
And he carried around the lead for the rest of his life to prove it.
indeed.
And he was also in pain, most likely, because of it. So so Aaron Burr, he flees the North, he goes West. He has maybe some grand designs on starting his own country. Maybe. How does he cross paths with Andrew Jackson?
Well, he's meandering all over the place, in part to collect people to come along on my glory expedition to do something that I'm not going to be clear about. And in the course of meandering around out West, he meets Andrew Jackson. He likes Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson liked Burr. Somehow this is not surprising. I think Burr liked the aspects of Jackson that, like, he was just going to go out for what he wanted. He wasn't a shy guy. He was a bold guy. Jackson liked Burr, and I think saw him to some degree as a man ahead of his time for taking the opportunity and making the bold move. So they actually got along pretty well, liked each other pretty well, which totally fits. I think people generally don't see Aaron Burr and Andrew Jackson as existing in the same time period, never mind endorsing each other to a certain degree. But that is how he meets Andrew.
And this has got to be before the Battle of New Orleans? Like, this is before 1815.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. And he had a piece of advice for Jackson.
Which was?
So Jefferson and James Madison essentially made sure that he wasn't president, and then did not help him much after that election.
Persona non grata.
Exactly. So he said to Jackson, never trust a Virginian.
But wait, okay, now, and again, I only know pieces of this, and that's why I'm hoping you can fill this in. Monroe was kind of friendly with Burr, right?
Well,
correct me if I'm wrong on this.
They were Revolutionary War veterans together. So Monroe has some friendships that aren't necessarily typical of a Virginian.
Right, because Monroe had a dueling. He had a hothead, right? He had a temper as well.
He almost dueled with Hamilton. There's an amazing account. I don't remember if it's in my Essential Hamilton, but the other Hamilton writings book that's bigger has the document in there. Hamilton thinks that Monroe leaked news of the Reynolds pamphlet, and
Reynolds is the affair.
Maria Reynolds is who he had an affair with, and later, and the people who discovered it, the Jeffersonian Republicans who discovered it, all promised not to say anything about it, and then lo and behold, it becomes news, and Hamilton goes to the three men who came to him and said, are you messing with money, or is there something else? And Hamilton says, something else. I'm committing adultery. The other two people say, I didn't leak it, and Monroe won't say that. So then Hamilton decides he must be the one who leaks it. So he goes to meet with Monroe and brings with him a second, which means, okay, we're in dual territory. And Monroe has a second there as well. So already we're in a bad place. And one of the seconds transcribed their conversation, which is amazing. If you're talking and trying to understand dueling, what you see in the conversation is Monroe getting chillier and chillier, and Hamilton getting more and more red-faced. So, Hamilton keeps, Monroe keeps interrupting, and Hamilton says, if you let me finish.
Mm-hmm.
And Monroe, and every time he says, would you let me finish? Hamilton goes back to the beginning and says, I will start again. So this is not going well. And ultimately, they insult each other. Hamilton says very carefully, if you are saying you didn't leak the Reynolds affair, quote, that as your representation is totally false. He doesn't use the L word, liar, but he accuses Monroe of being a liar. And Monroe says, are you accusing me of being a liar? You are a scoundrel. And that's another dueling word. And essentially, Hamilton says, I'm ready to meet you as a gentleman. And Monroe says, I'm ready to meet you as a gentleman. And they start talking about weapons. Where are your weapons? And the 2 seconds step in and say, whoa, like this should not be happening here. And it's ultimately settled with nobody admitting they did anything wrong. But yes, Monroe had a hot head.
Okay, so I've taken us down a rabbit hole, which I love. Personally, I love rabbit holes.
I'm like the queen of rabbit holes.
I have another one, but we're not going to go down it.
Yeah.
But so let's get back to Burr. So Burr's in the West. He's making some moves. Whatever happens of these plots, if we want to call them that?
Not a lot happens with the plots. He's meandering around with men. He has canoes. They're armed. It's unclear what he's doing. He never openly confesses about what it is he's doing. In the end, what happens is, not a lot happens out West at all. But one of the people who started out helping him, James Wilkinson, who I believe at the time was commander-in-chief of the Army, if I have that correct, leaks. He realizes this isn't going well, and he leaks this, and news gets to President Jefferson. And now Burr is seemingly guilty of what they are saying at the time, treason. He's trying to break off part of the West or seize part of the West and make his own country. Like, pardon me here, but what the hell?
Right, and a little foreign interference as well going on. And
right. He had talked to a British ambassador. I don't remember if he met with a Spanish ambassador, but he'd been mingling with the Spanish. So yeah, it's whatever's happening. It's not good. So he is beginning to be brought up on charges for what he's doing out West, where he's acquitted again and again. And then he once again gets charged with something that he did ultimately when he was meandering around Virginia. And he's charged with treason and brought to Richmond, Virginia for his trial. Supposedly, he wasn't wandering around like a gentleman in a frock coat. He was, I don't know if he's wearing buckskin, but he's wandering around out there looking, a little rough and ready, not like his normal self. Supposedly, wherever he was caught, they found him, they captured him, they grabbed him, and he looked to people and said, they're coming to take me. Someone stand up for me. And nobody did. And he was then grabbed and put on a horse to be taken east. Supposedly, he was crying because it was so humiliating. And then there is indeed the treason trial of Aaron Burr in Richmond, Virginia in 1807. I have to make the point here. He kills Hamilton in 1804. We're only in 1807 at this point. So
it seems like he's coming apart is what it seems like. It seems like he has no compass, no North Star at this point. And he's trying to reconstitute his fortunes, and it's just not happening for him.
Yes.
And now he looks like Gary Busey or something being this is what I imagine being captured.
Wow.
Yeah.
I might save that image.
you can definitely do that. Yeah. So is he convicted of treason?
He is not.
He is not.
Acquitted. And what's remarkable
about another bullet.
But what's remarkable about this is Thomas Jefferson, as president, talks about the coming trial, hasn't happened yet, and declares Burr guilty before the trial.
Sounds like somebody else I know.
You mean messing with justice?
Yeah.
What a shock. So anyway, despite that, and it's a big deal trial. It maybe not quite an O.J. Simpson trial, but a big, big deal trial. But he's acquitted. But now, national stage, not so good. State politics, not so good. The West, really not so good.
Right.
So he goes to Europe.
And
He puts himself in exile.
in exile. Like, so where in Europe does he go?
He mostly hovers in England and France. One of and he befriends some people there and hangs out with them. So he's kind of hanging out with some celebrity figures. My favorite is in 1800, when Hamilton is trying to get people to not support Burr. William Godwin was a political philosopher of the time. And he basically thought that, laws and the state imposed on people's general sense of what was right and wrong. He might be called an anarchist. And Hamilton says, in trying to get people to not like Burr, Godwin! He's preaching Godwin! This is Godwinism! So who does Burr connect with in England?
Godwin.
William Godwin.
Yeah.
And they're friendly, and they hang out together. To Burr's credit, he's one, and what I've seen so far as a scholar, the only elite political gentleman that I've come across who read Mary Wollstonecraft's writing on the rights of women and wanted to discuss it. And he says at one point, I couldn't find any man willing to talk about that with me. So he's actually intrigued with women's rights. He kind of shows that in his education and the way he treats his daughter, Theodosia. That's to his benefit. Mary Wollstonecraft, by this point, has died, but she was the wife of William Godwin.
Aaron Burr is such a tragic figure. He feels like a tragic figure.
Right?
And he had a great ambition and some major accomplishments. And he was part of this founding generation.
He was.
Like, he served in the Revolution. And did he go to Princeton? I think wasn't he a classmate?
College of New Jersey, yeah.
College of New Jersey. But he was plagued by self-imposed bad luck, I guess. I don't know. They say you make your own luck. Do you make your own bad luck?
Well, if you are exceedingly ambitious, which Hamilton was too, and you do have that streak of opportunism in you, who you'll make bold moves and do whatever it takes to get what you want, then yeah, you're making your own bad luck. This is what Hamilton says in letter after letter. He has no theory. He has no ideology in the election of 1800. And what some Federalists say to each other is, well, when you're engaging in politics, it's really handy to have a guy who has no theory and no ideology, because he's willing to do anything. So yeah, he basically makes his own bad luck.
How should we view Aaron Burr as a person and as a historical figure?
Before I get to that, I have to give you the final tragic end.
Oh, please.
Of Aaron Burr. So he hangs out in Europe for a while, and then finally comes back to the United States, goes back to New York, tries to restart his law practice. But he's basically, this is a little extreme, but not quite. He basically.
What year is this, would you say? Roughly.
1817.
Okay.
Maybe. Tries to start his law practice back up. And he basically becomes a tourist attraction, meaning people show up at his law office to look through the windows and say that they saw Aaron Burr. People who walk by him on the street avert their eyes because they don't want to meet the eyes of Aaron Burr. So he is a tragic figure, despite the fact that he makes all his own luck or unluck. He ends up being this scorned figure, and ultimately dies in New York, refusing really to explain why he did what he did, even refusing to acknowledge whatever his religious beliefs were. Someone says, "What were your religious beliefs?" And he says, on that subject, "I am coy." Doesn't have an explanation, and dies in 1836. So the question, the original question, I know it's pretty long way after the founding period.
He outlives or almost outlives Madison, right? I
He
mean,
does outlive them.
yeah.
They die in 1826. He outlives them by 10 years.
Yeah.
He's the guy who's still hanging around. But that's, in a way, when your question about how should we think about him or what should this tell us, he becomes this symbol of the founding who is out of time, who no longer fits, really, who represents some aspects of the founding, I suppose you could say, that are, if not admirable, then notable. You know, he is part of the founding. He fought in the Revolution. He was vice president of the United States. But also, all of the things that he did that were really not admirable are kind of a reminder that we should bear in mind more often than we do, that the founding isn't some golden glory period. It's complicated. It's full of things that the United States claimed and didn't live up to and didn't intend to live up to. There was glory and there was sin. And in a way, Aaron Burr lingering on some kind of stage like that can be a reminder of that. Most people don't know what happened to him, which is why that was such a good question.
Yeah.
But he's kind of a symbol of that.